we were just having a very interesting conversation before this podcast started, and I want to come back later to what you were just saying when we have more context. But let me ask you, because, um, you know, as part of some of the conversations we've been having recently, we've been speaking to people who have been involved in the environmental and the climate movements for like long periods of time, and getting their perspective. And you've been working on these issues since, is it fair to say, the 1960s? What has changed the most from your perspective?
What has changed the most is that I would say the environmental and climate movement hasn't learned how to have a narrative that touches people. In other words, it's one thing to have a symptom, a crisis, something that is coming up scientifically or theoretically or experientially, and say, hey, wait a minute, this has got a cause, there's an effect, let's deal with the cause, or we won't have the effect, etc. I mean, I'm just generalizing about the environmental movement as a whole, but what's happened, I feel, in the last 50 years is that the climate movement, let's call it the climate movement for the sake of narrowing it a little bit, which is not true, but and that is that the climate narrative has failed, completely failed. And if you think after 50 years of knowing, we understand the science very, very well. This is not, rocket science at all, about increasing, the CO2 in the atmosphere is going to change the balance between incoming and outgoing heat. It's going to be more incoming than outgoing. The Earth does regulate itself in terms of heat. And it's regulating itself right now by absorbing it and then what it does with it. But the point being is that after 50 years, less than 1% of anybody in the world is doing anything about it. Can you imagine? Here's a crisis. By the way, the future of humanity is at stake, not the planet. The planet will recover. The future of humanity is at stake. And after 50 years, less than 1% are involved in doing anything. That's not a good narrative.
Can you um can you map it for me? Because I don't, like, I hear what you're saying, but I struggle to visualize it in terms of, has there been a period where the narrative was working, or was there a period where we were getting it right and then it changed into something that wasn't? Because I remember, for example, going back 20 years when I was 10, 15 years old, the narrative that I was aware of was about polar bears, about penguins, about saving animals, right? And whilst that might not have been an entirely accurate narrative, it did capture people's attention. So was
Yes.
that a narrative that worked, and then we've moved into something that doesn't work as much, or how has it worked?
Well, there's two things there. That narrative is really about biodiversity. Okay.
Right.
And so what you do is you use charismatic creatures, animals, and so forth, to capture people's attention, or it's like, oh my God, something's happening
Save
to
the
them.
Panthers,
Of
yeah.
course, I mean, we have that innate empathy, as human beings and so forth. But it didn't go to first cause. It went to saving them, save the whales, save this, save this. Of course, of course, of course. But it didn't go to first cause. What's first cause? What is causing us to destroy the biosphere? Interesting question. And then you pull the string on that flower bag and you go back to capitalism. You go back to extraction. You go back to Western colonial activities, particularly starting with the doctrine of discovery from the papacy, the Pope in 14, was it 82? I forget when it was, when the Pope said to the Spanish, if you discover something, it's yours, to say ours from, the papal point of view. And you had these Spanish conquistadors, landing in parts of South America, right? And these big ships would come in, the native people, the indigenous people going, what the heck, is coming in on the ocean, never seen anything like it. They're all dressed in metal. They have these things on their thing with feathers coming out, and they have, swords and this and that. And they read to people, said, sit down, read, listen to us. And they explained that everything there, the land, the women, the children, the riches, the crops belong to us. That's what they said. The, the people couldn't understand a word they were saying.
Like, okay,
Okay,
I guess, yeah.
and then that started it. And then the Spanish killed 88 million people in North America, South America, Central America. 88 million people were extirpated. Okay, so we want to go back and say, well, wait a minute, how is it that we are extirpating species now, whole ecosystems, well, we've been doing it for 500 years.
We're
And
following in the footsteps.
yeah, and why do we do it? Well, we do it for money. We do it because we can get something. And so what happened then was the beginning of an extractive mentality, which is that basically the Europeans, whether it be the English or the French or the Dutch or the Germans or the Spanish or the Portuguese, could go out into the world, get and take what they wanted. First, it was silver, and gold. But I mean, people, they could get anything they wanted, and then it was sugar and tobacco and things like that. And then enslaving people, the Western Passage, going to, West Africa, and then, bringing in workers. Well, they weren't workers; they were enslaved human beings, that had really beautiful cultures that they lived within that were very sustainable and viable. And so they were brought in and so forth. And so we are still in that economy. We are still in an economy that is extracting. And now we talk about, oh, well, we're going to do solar, we're going to do AI, we're going to do this. Well, wait a minute. Hang on. What do you need to do that? Oh, you need rare earths and you need trace minerals, not trace, but I mean, rare minerals. And well, where do you get them? Well, you get them from all over the world, from Chile to northern China to Congo, right? And so now we are mining, we are killing children, we are destroying places, we're destroying rivers to get things to save the earth. Do you see the paradox and the irony of the narrative, So the people saying, oh, we need to get rid of fossil fuels, Okay. And how are you doing that? By destroying the living world. So
Yeah, I can see why it's a tough sell, because this is not traditionally the sexiest of messages, right? It's like going back to like colonialism and capitalism being the roots of the problem. I can see why people don't necessarily buy into that as their sales pitch.
I agree, and I would go right to what is the narrative right now. Okay, just right now, what do people hear? What do people to say to each other? And what they talk about is, first of all, the climate crisis, right? Okay, the climate cannot have a crisis. It doesn't give a hoot what we think or say or write. It's the climate. Second of all, the climate is not something other. It's not distinct. It's not separate. It's the biosphere that creates the climate. And just like you have lungs and you have air, okay, CO2, you have oxygen, inside you, and you're a physical body, okay? Well, the Earth is the same, right? It's a physical body that has a gaseous envelope, right? And it breathes, it exchanges, plants take in CO2, and make oxygen, this is beautiful, beautiful cycle of life, and so we've disturbed it, but we're not going to, in a sense, address it if we say basically the climate has a crisis. Or if we use verbs, which are very masculine verbs, if I may say so for my gender, we're going to fight, tackle, and combat the climate crisis. Now we're in real deep doo-doo, because basically what you've done is you've othered it. It's out there somewhere. Now you're, God knows what, some warrior, going there and you're going to fight the crisis. Well, othering is what caused the climate crisis. We have othered human beings, other cultures, other places, other traditions, other ways of knowing, and overlaid, the Western scientific reductionist way of understanding the world. And there's nothing wrong with Western reductionist science, by the way. It's a one way of seeing the world, but it's not the way. It's not the only way, and so forth. So again, and then we've come up with this amazing lexicon of words like we're going to decarbonize. I mean, if the Earth could giggle, it would. Like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Decarbonize. And really what we should be doing is recarbonizing, really, because we've taken this carbon, right, from the soil, really, gas, coal, and oil. It was from plants and fish, marine life, and then burned it and stick it up in the air, in the atmosphere. And so should be recarbonizing the Earth, because we are decarbonizing it right now. We talk about things like direct air capture as a solution. It's like, I'm laughing, but it's like, oh, really? You're going to capture the air and you're going to do what? You're going to put it back on the Earth. How interesting, What are you going to do with that air you capture, that CO2, Actually, you're going to put it in depleted oil wells so you can capture more oil so you can burn that. That's what oil companies are wanting to do, planning to do, spending billions of dollars, just get the CO2 that we put up there, bring it back so we can put more CO2 up there, So, I mean, I was in an audience when I've done this before, about the language, and I said, half this room understands what I'm talking about. They said, what do you mean, why half? I said, I'm talking to the women. If any woman here has not felt objectified in her life, raise your hand. No one raises their hand.
Yeah.
Okay. So and I'm using gender now as the male species objectifies and thinks that describes, helps, works, and it doesn't. It actually alienates, separates, and harms. And so that's what I mean about the climate narrative. Now, I am not criticizing you people, the listeners, about what they do, what they care about, what they are on a daily life. Not at all. I think they're heroines and heroes, and they have all my support. Absolutely. So I'm not talking about human beings now, people. They're extraordinary. I'm talking about the narrative. And the narrative came out of something that we inherited, which is, Western reductionist, scientism and culture that actually doesn't communicate well. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't land. It landed for us, that's fine, but it hasn't landed for 99% of the people on Earth.
Paul, when you see numbers that are coming out, like when people do surveys where they say, look, 80% of people around the world care about climate change, do you think that we've kind of not misdiagnosed is not the right phrase, but we've kind of missed the target? Like the work in the climate movement has been around getting people to care and know and assume that translates to action, but actually that's not what's happened. I'm just curious to know, like, how does numbers like that, how do they influence your thinking?
Not at all. I think people are caring. Human beings are caring species. So it doesn't impress me. It validates what I believe, actually. The human beings are good people and they care about each other, about their children, about their family, about other people, and so, but I don't think it's an actionable question.
Right.
And I think if we're going to be most effective, we have to go upstream to first cause. There is the parable of the river, which I don't know who created it, by the way. Bishop Desmond Tutu recited it once in Georgia in a church where I was, but I've heard it many times, which is you're by the river and you're having a picnic or whatever and so forth, and then you see a child or somebody, in the river, being washed away, can't swim like this, and you look and you jump in the river, of course, and you save the child, right? And you bring her or him back to land, and you're going, wow, shoot, that was close. And then you go back to your picnic or whatever you're meeting, and then pretty soon, oh, there's another child going down the river, and you go back in. When the third child goes by, somebody says, instead of saving the children, we might want to go upstream and see who's throwing them in the river. And so the same thing holds true for whatever movement you want to call it, the climate movement, the environmental movement, biodiversity, so forth, is we have to go upstream to first cause. If we're not focused on first cause, then we're scrambling and to deal with the outcome, the symptoms, the manifestations of first cause. But we're not gonna fix it. That's another male verb, you know. And I'm a guy, and I love to fix things. There's nothing wrong with fixing, but you know, I used to race motorcycles. I had to fix it all the damn time, you know. I mean, it broke. So it's a good verb, but it's a bad verb when you look at the earth as a whole. You know, the earth can fix itself and does every single day, you know, and so forth. What we need to be is in alignment with that, as opposed to coming in as a, you know, charismatic species, you know, that knows better. No, we don't. No, we don't. Yeah. Well, the last question last part of that question, I'm not going to answer. Are we effed? You know, I would say again, go back up, like just let's sort of untangle that. You know, the down cycle. Okay, the down cycle. What's down cycling? What is it exactly? You know, what's down cycling is corporations and government. That's what we're talking about in terms of policy, in terms of legality, in terms of enforcement of laws, in terms of, oh, well, we don't need ESG after all. You know, corporations who committed to ESG said, we'll just kind of put that away for now. You know, I mean, like, well, that was very sincere, wasn't it? I mean, it was just, you know, a joke, really, you know, that we're going to do this. We'll buy some carbon credits like Microsoft, you know, from, you know, I mean, things like that, you know, as if that was going to make a big difference, you know. Here's the problem, Ben, which is really important to understand. We think that there's a top-down solution, and we live on a planet that is not top-down. It's not a top-down place we live. Top-down only harms and destroys. So when the top-down institutions talk about top-down, you know, solutions, and then they pull back, we should say, yeah, of course, because they don't count in that sense. They really don't count. They count as destroyers. I don't mean they don't, you know, we can just forget about them. But they don't count in terms of esprit de corps, in terms of our sensibility, in terms of what's happening. And I would say it's quite the opposite. That is that humanity is doing amazing things right now everywhere in the world, and we don't know about it. Why don't we? Yeah, because it's not in the Guardian. It's not in FT. It's not in, you know, the New York Times. It's not in the Post. It's not in, you know, you don't see it. You see the big stories. The big stories are about who screwed up and who got killed and who's corrupt, and you know, big thing about Mandelson and the you know, Starmer right now and so forth. And he's like, come on, you know, I mean, these are two very, very small human beings, in my opinion, you know, who just happen to be in positions of power, you know, that they abuse. And in fact, what's happening, you know, is that humanity is absolutely rising up and organizing all over the world and so forth. And that is how change really occurs. And that's how the planet has always manifested itself. It's been an emergent quality. And right now, I think we see this emergent quality in human beings and everywhere in the world. And so one of the things I'm doing is creating, well, I'm not creating it, a bunch of us are creating a thing called the Alliance for Earth. And you can go to allianceforearth.org and you'll just see a splash page. It's not released yet. But the point is that it is to be a way that we can all see and talk to each other. Who's we? Everybody on Earth, whether it's an NGO, a school, science, whether it's a B Corps, whether it's this, who really is actively searching and acting upon the problems that are very evident, and the causes which are very evident, can connect to each other, dialogue, connect, so I can find out who in Gambia is doing deforestation work. Just boom, and we can start talking. And it's in 105 languages, okay? So we can translate back and forth. And so English is not the dominant language in the thing. Yeah, no, not at all. And so it becomes a way in which the world can connect to itself and then start to realize that we this world of restore, of renewal, of regeneration, and kindness, by the way, is actually a growing population, not a shrinking population.
This is super interesting. It feels like we're like, I don't know how to describe it really. It's like the illusion of capitalism, isn't it? That we're all like just individuals and like, we're all only the sum total of our choices, and that in the grand scheme of things, nothing we do really has any power or makes any difference, and it's just the big people who are the leaders that change all of the stuff, which does point away from, like, at this point we've spoken to literally hundreds of people who are creating or running initiatives that are changing and challenging in their local communities, in their local areas, transforming the ways that people live. And I think there's so much power in like telling those stories and exposing those stories, because it makes it seem possible or viable for you, right? Like it makes, I mean, hearing all of that stuff makes me feel like the things that I do can make some kind of difference or have some kind of impact, which I think is really important.
I couldn't agree more. And that's what keeps me going. And those are my friends, and that's what I do. And I don't try, I mean, sometimes what I do rises, to some level of influence. I mean, speeches or something I've given, but in books I've written, but it doesn't matter. What matters is what people do every day together, and how they learn from each other and share and act, and and it may seem to some, that, well, that's not very powerful. It is the most powerful thing in the world. Because everything we're seeing right now from in the news, the headlines, will disappear and fall and fail. It always has and always will. I mean, when power absolutely concentrates, it's corruption, and corruption will fail. And so it's not that we shouldn't address that as well politically, and not vote or not participate. Of course we should, but to look at those powers to be as somehow failing us in terms of biodiversity, in terms of ecology, in terms of climate, in terms of our children and the creatures that live here. No, you shouldn't expect that from concentrated sources of power, whether it's capitalism.
So then does the change always feel, in your experience, does the change always feel slow and small? Is that just what we've got to get used to, especially in like moments like now when it feels like everything is very overwhelming? Like I feel like we're literally watching the collapse of empire, or of the empire that we have existed in, which is like a deeply uncomfortable process to sit through. Is it a message that people need to hear, that actually change is localized and it is small and it is bit by bit, rather than looking for big moments? Or are the big moments important as well?
I think both are true, Ben. I think both things are true. Absolutely, we're seeing the collapse of empire. And there's no question that it's going to collapse in my mind. I mean, it can't go further, and politically, socially, in terms of ecologically and so forth, is corrupt. And so we'll see the demise of empire, no question, and the United States is leading the way again.
Always the leaders, yeah.
Paul, can I ask? I'm really curious because this analysis of where we find ourselves and those root causes is not what you hear from a lot of people. And I think what Ben and I have experienced, not from our guests, but as we've become, because neither of us come from this movement, this podcast has been a vehicle of understanding what's happening around us and the amazing people working on it. But is that for a long time, there's just been a desire to keep the systems of capitalism, extraction and colonialism in place while also, bringing down the carbon and keeping us within 1.5. Like, we like to keep everyone just where they are, but just not, increase the temperature of the planet. And what you're analyzing is a completely different problem in a way. I mean, meaning the source of it is a different problem than what's been said. Why do you think this way? What has influenced you in your life to come to this kind of conclusion, which, quite frankly, we don't really hear anymore?
It's not super popular, yeah.
Yeah, I think the same thing that you're doing, which is you ask questions, you read, you listen, you talk to people, and over time, and unless you're arrogant in a way which you may not see about yourself, you change. That's what the mind is for. That's what, this beautiful, extraordinary consciousness, and it changes every time you hear, see anything. It changes. We know that. Now, to me, it's just emergent. It's an emergent property of being a species, a human being on this planet, which is to try to figure out, where do I live and how is it going? And, and then to listen to people who are smarter, wiser, and more seasoned than you, perhaps, but to listen to people who are suffering. It's very important to hear the voiceless. They're not voiceless, but I mean, they're not given voice. They're really, really important. I mean, you mentioned in your questions, about the civil rights movement. Well, I cut my teeth on the civil rights movement, and a white boy from Berkeley, and living with African Americans in the South was, oh my goodness. I mean, if you want to have a, now you see, now you don't. I mean, kind of moment, where everything that you believed that you didn't understand, you believed, so forth, is just stripped away, and you see a world that goes back, 400 years in America, that was absolutely, if it was just exploiting African Americans, well, that would be, okay, exploit. No, humiliating, killing, raping, I mean, it's just terrible, and you saw it, you talked to people, and you realize nothing gave me more faith in humanity than African American people in the South when I went down there during the Civil Rights Movement. Nothing, and not just Black people and human beings as a general, but in what people can do given 400 years of humiliation, oppression, death. I mean, all the things that were weighed upon them as slaves, and inside they never were slaves. That's the point, and so I think when I look at the world today, I think it's that moment of realization. The good thing about being a slave is you're one. I mean, that's the only good thing about it. The bad thing about being a white person in, the affluent society of today is so forth, is you don't know you're a slave. You don't know what. You just don't know. You are beguiled and charmed and seduced, and you got stuff, you can buy things and this and that, and I mean, you're absolutely blind, and you've been blinded by a culture, and so forth. But there's no difference between a slave, and most people today in Western culture. Yeah.
I'm curious to know, having had those experiences early on as part of the civil rights movement in the US, you know, working with Martin Luther King Jr., you know, like there's something around this idea of how do you stop yourself from becoming cynical? Because I think there's something I can only imagine, having done the work you've done and watching what's happening in America today, both when it comes to racial equity and when it comes to climate, that it how do you protect yourself from that cynicism and that, I don't know, grief?
Yeah, surely it feels like there is no point. Surely this is like just a very circular narrative that feels like we're right back at the beginning of where we started.
It shouldn't, because there's two counter forces. One is the everything that created, 1492. When Cristoforo Colombo, went to the Caribbean and so forth, and met the Taino people, and and literally snatched their babies and fed them to their dogs. That's the first. That's the first contact between Western Europeans, and the indigenous people of the Americas and so forth. I mean, that's could make you very, very, very cynical. Of course, I understand that, but I I just feel like, um, if you just look to the depredation and the cruelty, and insensitivity, if that's a even strong, not a strong enough word, of Western culture in the way it has spread over the world and so forth, and produced many good things too, by the way. So this isn't black and white in that sense at all, and so forth. Um, but if you look at that, um, uh, and don't look at the people, at the individuals, at the cultures, the art, the language, the understandings, the spiritual practices, the courage and the bravery. Look at the 550 indigenous cultures of the Americas, Canada, America, Turtle Island, as they call it. I mean, what they've endured is just, oh God, it's so terrible. So terrible. And now it's interesting to me to see that they had a prophecy. Their prophecy, not they, all of them, but there's prophecy, especially in the eastern part, that the colonists would come. They prophesied their arrival, and sure enough. And what they said is, they will dominate for 7 generations. Okay, a generation in indigenous culture is 70 years. So they had it just about right, 500 years. And at 500 years, it flips, it goes back, And what you're seeing in the Americas really beautifully, and by the way, in South America and Central America, so all the Americas, is the indigenous cultures are really organizing, rising up, speaking, and organizing in beautiful ways, But like Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is a great scientist and of the and Native American, Potawatomi culture. I mean, the way of seeing the world that they embody and express and so forth is so beautiful, so exquisite, and so I just feel like, even working with Martin Luther King, or working, listening to him, he didn't know me. I was there in the room. But I mean, but listening to him, and and I mentioned, like, I mean, 2 weeks before, one of the deacons at the church where we met every night, every day, was murdered by the Alabama state troopers. Just, I mean, it was a lynching basically. And I was in church, and his mom was there. His mother was there, of course that was her church. He was the deacon of the church. And Martin Luther King said, do not demonize the white man. That's not what we're here to do, and express compassion for everybody and everything and every race and so forth, and express it so eloquently and so beautifully. And that's what the church was about, and it goes back to James Tallarico, who is running for office here in the United States, and he's a Christian, and he's going to seminary school, and he's running for senator of Texas, and what he says is, this barefoot Jew, we call Jesus, only said two things to people, which is love God and love thy neighbor. All the rest of that stuff somebody else put in. He didn't say any, he didn't 10 commandments, this, that, all sort of stuff. That's white man wrote all that stuff about the Bible, about abortion, this, that stuff. I'm sorry. He said, that is not in the Bible. That is not what Jesus said. He said, love God and love thy neighbor. That's enough. If we did that, you don't have to be a Christian to do that, then it would be a different world, And so, and then what is God? Or, that's a good question. And then thy neighbor includes, the dragonflies, and the hummingbirds, and the things that creep and crawl and fly and, run through the woods at night and all that sort of stuff, depending where we live and so forth. So those are our neighbors, right? As well as the people who live next to us. So to me, there's very simple, I don't mean binary ways, but a way of being and seeing the world that say, yeah, look, I mean, it's hard to wake up this morning and listen to the news about Iran. Okay, it's very, very difficult for me to listen to that, and my heart aches. But you mentioned something, Ben, about grief. And to me, grief is a fantastic, wonderful blessing as an emotion. You want to feel grief. If you're not feeling grief, then I don't think you're really aware of what's going on, and grief comes from the heart. Right? It comes from the heart. And the heart is the one organ that always tells the truth. Count on it. You want to know the truth? So grief is a blessing. It's a guide. It's a signal. It's us being our best self when we feel grief, because it's our heart. And that's what's missing, when we open the page or listen to the news that day. Oh, where's the heart in all this? It's not there. It's gone. It's absent. But not in most people in the world. So I have faith, a tremendous faith in people in the world who are mothers and fathers and children and care and act on that, based on that care, and do the best they can, and they will surmount the concentrations of power that exist today that are destroying our cultures and our places and our land and our oceans and our seas and our forests, and yeah, they will.
Yeah. This is incredible. Sorry, Paul, this must be a really weird experience for you. Normally when we do these interviews, like, we're like laughing and joking and like making witty observations. And for the listeners, you can't see what we're seeing in this moment. Maryam's having a very visceral reaction to this conversation, and I'm getting like goosebumps because it feels like you are in lots of ways speaking to us, maybe from the future. I don't know. It feels like you're able to embody something in this conversation that feels like it is completely lacking for most of us in this moment, which is like hope. And it's hope that's not based in a fairy tale of like what could happen. It's a hope that is rooted in a very like honest and accurate and in some ways like quite brutal like analysis of the situation that we're in, but it feels so necessary. It feels so true to what we're going through. Maryam, I don't know if you want to respond. You don't have to, but
no,
you
I just
want to ask a question or make a
I will
point.
say that I have done so many of these. I mean, hundreds of these interviews with Ben, and I don't think I've like cried like this in any of them. So, Paul, apologies. I am Iranian, and so I feel that grief that you speak about at the moment. And I think what has become so evident and what I hear from you is that we have like lost our ability to see each other's humanity and that connection to the world around us. Like, I think there's nothing more symbolic that I've heard that, you know, you will have seen this in the news, but when they bombed the oil refineries in Iran, that then followed by days of oil basically raining from the sky, followed by 1 foot of snow landing on Tehran. And this kind of symbolism of how we've lost our connection to each other, so deeply, and the nature is kind of coming in and trying to do what we seem to be failing at. It just felt to me very symbolic to see those things happen in succession. And yeah, it's very moving, hence why I'm in this state.
Yeah, I mean, what you described in Tehran, with the snow and the oil, I mean, the black and the white, so to speak, the heat of oil, not, hasn't been burned yet, but it was bombed, and that's heat. And then, the contrast to the frozen water is beyond mythical. It's like, it's indescribable for, I think, period, but for the people who live there, and who then, by the way, the other part of that is to breathe enormously toxic air. I mean, not just smog, when you bomb an oil refinery and oil tanks and so forth, that oil is poison. It's poison air. It's not like, toxic or bad air. No, it's poison. And so people are being poisoned. And, but, you said something about hope, Ben, and, people, I mean, maybe this will make you laugh, maybe not, but people ask me, he said, "Are you hopeful?" I'm saying, "No, not at all." And they're like, "Whoa, you've just done this whole thing about that, and you're not hopeful." I said, "No, I'm not." And I said, my Buddhist background teaches that hope is the pretty mask of fear. In other words, you don't hope unless you're afraid. And I said, what we need now is courage. I don't want to hear about hope. I want to hear about courage. And because courage, is the heart. That's the root of the word, And so that's what we need. That's what we need to be ourselves and so forth. And I don't mean to disabuse hope and what that that brings to people, but I'm just saying is what we need is courage, and to be fearless, and in who we are, what we do, and why we're here. And so to me, the environmental crisis, the climate crisis, all these things that are called crises and so forth, what we're experiencing and seeing and so forth, is, it brings us to life. Or not. It's your choice, our choice. But it changes the whole fabric and quality of our life and what it means to be a human being right now. And you look at the panorama of things that are dangling out there in terms of trying to seduce us or get us to buy, experience, do, or go, and you realize it's just like silly trinkets, and it doesn't. Those things aren't important. They're not, and they're harmful. And we harm ourselves when we're attracted to them, or, beguiled by them, or think that somehow we'll have a better life if we buy this or look this way. And we won't. And so it's a really interesting time of disillusion as well, which I think is actually what the activists and whether on the streets or whether in the schools or whether whatever they're doing, what they're doing is really a thing of stripping away illusions. People don't like their illusions stripped away. because they cling to them, it's their identity, and basically, our media, with all due respect, our television, the BBC, so forth, we're creating false identities. And because they're not being, the BBC never, that I know of, I read it faithfully and so forth, is very factual. I trust their fact checking, but they're not telling us the truth. That doesn't mean they're lying or telling us untruth. No, it's just they're not telling us the truth.
I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. I think we should have that written everywhere with what's wrong. I mean, I said earlier that we don't hear your analysis of the problem very often, but I'm going to revise my statement because we do hear it when we look outside of the global north, right? We hear it when we look at indigenous communities. We hear it in other in communities all else around the world. And I'm curious to know, because you've spoken about indigenous leadership with us so far, how has that influenced you, and when did you start to have those conversations that really have had such an impact, and how? And I just want to know a bit more about that.
I think I grew up in Berkeley, California. My father was a librarian at the University of California, and as I mentioned earlier, I had asthma until I was 17, 18. And so I tend to be a bookworm. When I was a teenager, I took a lot of drugs so I could play basketball and stuff like that, to tamp down my symptoms and so forth. But before that, I went to the library every single day. From the grammar school, I could walk to the library, University of California Library, which was then, I think, really one of the 2 or 3 biggest libraries in North America. I mean, extraordinary library. And I was Bill's kid. My father was Bill. And so I could go anywhere I wanted. Oh, that's Bill's kid. And I would go to the stacks, these stacks that went up 9, 10 stories, and go in the stacks and then go pick a floor and go sit down and start pull books out by the spine. And start reading them and so forth, And I think that is when the first time that I discovered the very westernized, albeit, descriptions and tales of explorers and Europeans coming to Turtle Island, the North American continent, and what they encountered. And it was just amazing, like for me as a child. I think for anybody, if they read those, it'd be amazing how they purified themselves, in a culture in Washington State, to become, in a sense, what's called a brujo, but I mean in Spanish, but to become a guide, a teacher, so forth. You had to have a dream. You had to have a dream that you would be that, and then they would present that to the other women. By the way, you had to be a woman. And they would say, that's a true dream. No, you didn't have a true dream. Come back later. But if it was a true dream, then you had to fast and dance and with water only for 7 days. Okay. And then after 7 days, you would eat acorn gruel. Okay. Acorn for 7 days and go back until you could see the dis-ease in yourself and literally pull it out and see it, and then re-engorge it. In other words, you could disgorge it, and then you put it back in. And that person could see the malady, the dis-ease, the elusiveness, or the delusion, really, of other people, and then she could be a healer. Not go to medical school. Go to person school.
Something slightly different, yeah. Same vibe.
Different. Yeah, but I mean, but so for me, reading these stories, about the first encounters, with Native Americans, was just astonishing, and so I think that's really where it started, Maryam, and never stopped, what I learned to do is not to grow my hair out long and put feathers in it and be, a fake Native American, which is what a lot of hippies did. Leather with little tassels and so. No.
I mean, we've already heard that you used to race motorcycles, so anything is on the table at this point.
Yeah, we're building a picture of what you are like.
You could get in my pit crew, Ben.
in one of you've called I love this phrasing you've used in your book Blessed Unrest around environmental and social groups being humanity's immune system. I think it's just such a visual way to think about the potential and also the importance of these groups. I'm curious, how is our immunity doing right now?
Well, what I said was, you quoted almost perfectly. I said it's humanity's immune response.
Response. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And that response is well in place still and so forth. You can get a malady or something, okay, and your body will have an immune response. It's trying to heal you, right? That's what it's trying to do. It's not trying to hurt you. It may feel bad, but and the way I see it is that that immune response is definitely being tested, by the culmination, of Western colonial activity, and manifesting in governance and in business, the two arms of that, and so forth. And so that's how, it's just how I see it. And so the Alliance for Earth, and I really encourage people to go to it and come and participate. It's not top down. It's it's us talking to each other, and there isn't a hierarchy. There's not a leader. There's not a nothing. Let's see each other. Let's talk to each other, and let's do it everywhere we can. So we learn and start to be, in a sense, what's the word? Looking for that word, but just the joyousness of knowing our brothers and sisters out there who are doing the same thing we're doing, but in a different place, in a different way. And many may be suffering from it, or they may be impoverished, or they may be, there's different experiences of it, and some are very successful, and it depends. But they're our brothers and sisters, and they care about each other, about this world, and about the world to come. That is the children that are unborn, that are coming to, to be here. And so we need to know our tribe, and that's not in a tribal sense of it's place-based, but there is a place here. It's called Earth, and that tribe is omnipresent and everywhere, and is, like I said earlier, is largely unseen. Unless, look at there's a really wonderful woman, 5 months pregnant, a really amazing activist who's trying to stop gold mining in Ecuador, in the cloud forest and so forth. And then what the gold companies do in Canada is hire people in Ecuador who hire people in Ecuador who hire motorcyclists, and they do drive-by shootings, and they killed her. Boom. Okay. 5 months pregnant. So when I see that and hear that, it's devastating to me. It's just devastating. But I'm also so amazed at the courage of people everywhere, and if that is an example of courage, I don't know what is, and so forth, And so it's just like, we've got to know each other's stories. We have to see that. We have to feel how extraordinary humanity is, as opposed to seeing how selfish and I could use really different words to describe my country and not mine, but the politics that exist right now. I mean, those are familiar words, but we want to see the opposite. Want to see us, and that's why I have complete faith. And people say, "Well, you seem very positive." No, I feel grief every day. I mean, if you didn't feel grief, then you're not paying attention.
Mm. So I have this question I wanted to ask you, because I think that there are some people who are listening who might feel like this way of understanding is not really for them, because maybe they work in the world of business, or they're an entrepreneur, or they are in that capitalist system that we spoke about. And I wonder, you have started businesses, you have worked in that world. Can you speak a bit to that intersection, that contradiction, that learning? How do you reconcile that? Or how can people start, not reconcile, but move forward if they're coming from that world?
Yeah, if they're entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs or farmers or people in food or whatever, I mean, who are producing, making, selling, uh, good on them. And that's what I've tried to do. What I say is that, we've gone down this, exploitative, basically, capitalist system. We learned it, extractive, take, I called it take, make, waste in my book, Ecology of Commerce, and, but we're really good at taking. I'm really good at that, and so if you enter into commerce right now, you're going to be part of that in some way, okay, in some way. But what's also true is that the degenerative pathway, which is really what most commerce is and has been, and even more so today, we can see the end of the road. All the headlines, all the reports coming back from whether it's the atmosphere or the ocean or the lands or, the degradation of land. We're losing 100 million hectares of arable land per year. Okay, so the food crisis is just staring at us, right at us, coming. But if we just glance at the headlines, we know that in fact this road ends. You can see it. I mean, it doesn't go much further. So either you see it and stop and say, I don't really want to do that anymore. And then you say, well, what am I going to do? Well, what you want to do then, in the best way you can, given what and are capable of doing or want to be capable of doing, is to say, well, I want to move towards regeneration. In other words, I want to create a business. I want to create a store. I want to create a farm. I want to create whatever it is that you are creating that actually starts to create more life instead of less. That's it. That's the turning point. That is the hinge, and so forth. You can't do it 100% from day one to day two. You can't do it. You're in a system that does it, and so forth. But so for those people, it's really about the pivot. And, and you have a lot of those people, a lot of those companies in the UK, by the way, extraordinary. And from Bristol to Ireland, and I know these people, and they're just fantastic, and they're leaders, and they're making pathways and so forth. So it's not about, oh, this is bad, this is good, but what am I going to do over there? No, do what you know what to do. Do what you love doing. That's very, very important. And then pivot, and you learn by doing it and so forth, and better ways of this. Using plastic now. Okay, what can I do? How can I get this to my customers in a way, that isn't polluting the ocean, and people's bodies as well, so forth, And so you don't necessarily have the answers, but you have the questions and you have the will, and your customers do too, because that's a symbiosis between what you do and the people who patronize you and care as well. So we are looking for those, you and I, we're looking for those companies, those products, those entrepreneurs, if you will, So yeah, I've done it in my life. I've tried. I've done the best. I've seen some of it go south, like Erewhon. It was just really. It was. I started in Boston, and we had 500,000 starving students who live in Boston, and we had the best inexpensive food in the world. And now it is in LA, and it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous store. It's about the privileged feeding the privileged. And so it's still got the name. And Erewhon was from a book by Samuel Butler, and it was basically nowhere backwards. It was an anagram for nowhere backwards. And I called it Erewhon because at that time, when I started it, we were nowhere. As far as I'm concerned, we were nowhere. And we wanted to go to somewhere so I used Erewhon as the name. And so the people who own it now have turned it into something else. But that doesn't mean that the farmers that came out of that, I think at one time I had 30,000 acres under contract. And these are farmers who are growing, we say organic now or regenerative and so forth. Actually, they didn't even use those terms. They just did it. And they taught me so much, and I walked the land with them. And a lot of them had inherited these farms, and they farmed that way before World War II. It was what the families did. They knew how to farm and save the land, and produce great products and so forth. And so that's where I learned about farming and the land and so forth, I talked to the farmers who knew the land and knew how to produce things that created more life instead of less. And now we have an agricultural system that actually destroys life and is substituted or with chemicals and pesticides and herbicides and so forth. Billions of pounds have been poured into soils and washing down seas and rivers and so forth. We really we have a very destructive system. But I just feel like I don't want to draw lines and say, oh, this is good and this is bad. I think people who go into business can do amazing, amazing things.
And I don't want to keep. I've like 1,000 questions, Ben. Do you want to jump
No,
in?
no, you can keep going. You were going to ask this question about the commerce stuff.
Well,
No,
I
you
was
can
gonna.
ask that.
I
That's
was
fine.
gonna ask Paul. I guess the question I have is do you then still think it's possible for business, for commerce to be regenerative rather than destructive, given everything you've seen?
Way it's a walk. I called that book I called The Ecology of Commerce. I
Yeah.
didn't say the ecology of business.
Right.
I
Explain the difference.
Well, commerce is ancient and sacred. It's exchange between peoples. And then when Lewis and Clark went, the expedition went across the United States and ended up, in the Northwest. And then the Native Americans there had beads. It was called wampum. That is currency, wampum. So they had beads there that were from Patagonia, from Chile. Well, how'd they get there? Uh, They got there by exchange. In other words, all the way up the coast of South America and then Mesoamerica and then North America and so forth, they were used as an exchange medium, right? That's commerce, okay? And so commerce is really an ancient, wonderful thing that humanity is engaged in. And so that's different than capitalism. And what's the point of capital? If you are a capitalist company or you're a company in a capitalist system, what's your job? To create more capital. That's otherwise, you're not going to do well. And so you create more capital. Well, what's that? Money. Well, where does the money come from? And then why is it accumulated? And then if it's accumulated, then who has power? And then what do? They invest in things that create more capital, right? So that is a devolving cycle, whereas commerce isn't a devolving cycle. It's an exchange, and it's about agreement and it's about mutual benefit. And so You can be regenerative. You can move, but you're moving towards it from a system that is degenerative. That's for sure. You understand that, and then step by step, one by one, you start to address those things that you do without wanting to do them, that are degenerative, that hurt, that harm, downstream perhaps, or upstream, and you correct, and and so that's what's happening all over. And so in the Alliance for the Earth are like B Corps and all sorts of things where people are the brothers, the pair thing, I forget in Ireland the full name, the company name, but there's people doing these fantastic things, and so that's included in the Alliance for the Earth as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
What a great distinction. Thank you. I think, Ben, I'm going to turn to you for our last question, because quite frankly, Paul, I feel like we could talk to you for maybe 2 more hours, but I know that you've already given us so much time. So Ben, why don't you take the last question?
Sorry, Paul, you are going to have to come back, unfortunately. It's very important. All right, so last question I'd love to ask you is, if we imagine that aliens crash land on the planet, they land in your garden for some reason, I don't know why, but they crash land in your garden, they crawl out of this spaceship, and the first thing they want to know is why this planet is worth saving. They've wiped out hundreds of other planets. They're like, why should we save this one? How do you explain that to them? Or what's the first thing that you'd show them?
Well, if they were aliens and they came from another planet, they wouldn't ask that question.
Maybe that's a good point.
Their question is how come you're destroying where you live?
Yeah, why don't you like it?
That's the thing. They would say, this is very curious, you benefit, you flourish, you've got a lot of you now. There's 8+ billion, running around. We're so curious to know where you learn to destroy the thing that gives you life, because this planet is nothing but life, and it is the emergent quality of life, and you're part of that emergence, as is every other 8.4 million species who live here, and by the way, we want to tell you something which you may not know, which is there are 3 trillion different beings here with you that aren't humans, and every day they're communicating, literally communicating with each other to teach each other to learn more about how to stay here, be here, what you can do, from microbes all the way to gibbons, monkeys, to, you name it, sow bugs and butterflies and, wolves, they're all communicating and talking about how to stay here. You're the only species that actually destroys where it lives. Of the 8.4 million species, we are fascinated. How did you get that wrong?
Same with the planet. The aliens would wipe us out instead of the planet. Yeah.
I kind of feel like, Paul, maybe the aliens have arrived and they have had this conversation with you.
With you.
It's a fair question, Yeah. It's like you're the only one. Yeah.
It's true. It's true. The when you take that perspective from the overview effect from far away. Yeah. Thank you so much for this time and for your generosity. It's been really special, and we really appreciate it.
I'm so grateful that you exist, that you're doing what you're doing, that you do it when you're feeling under the weather. So that was really well done. Thank you for working through all that with me. And I would love to come back. I just so appreciate and am grateful for what you were doing with your life, and it's just so crucial that we listen, share to each other, and wherever we can. And so what you're doing is seminal. It's so important. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please hit the follow button to make sure that you get next week's releases. While you're at it, please leave a rating and a review.
Now, let's shout out to our fabulous team behind the pod.
Executive produced by Josie Colter.
Produced by Ben Beheshty.
Music also by Ben Beheshty.
Communications by Tara Cooper and Issey Gladston.
Curation by Deesha Chandra.
Hosted by Ben Hurst.
I'm Maryam Pasha.
And remember,
Stay curious.